Well, welcome to this webcast. This is, I think, our third conversation. I'm here with Tracy. We've known each other for quite a few years. And rather than me give you a synopsis of a story, I'm going to ask him. But I would just want to say up front that, in my sense, is that you bring a really profound approach to meditation.
Hmm.
You're like a professional math guy, scientist, and my sense is you bring a capacity to observe clearly, which includes, of course, observing clearly when you're completely underwater. But in this interview, we'll be recapping some of Tracy's adventures and catching up on his insights. And what I find really helpful are his recommendations from the seat of a depth practitioner. So, Tracy, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Jonathan.
You and I actually went to the same Quaker boarding school in Pennsylvania.
Correct?
Me, many years before you were there.
Oh no, I just missed you by 1 year.
Oh, is that right? Oh my
Yep.
gosh. Wow. God, so you just missed getting hazed by me.
Yeah, right.
Well, I was like a humanities guy, and you were a serious math guy.
A
And
math guy.
I wonder, because we never talked about this before. Could you talk a little bit about your like your sort of your academic training, but also your professional training and what you did professionally, using math and science and all that stuff.
Well, let's see. My undergraduate degree is in mathematics, and my graduate degree is in computer science. And I guess the bulk of my career was as a satellite engineer. So, things whizzing around in the sky and orbital mechanics and fun stuff like that.
Yeah, orbital mechanics, that just goes right by me. Sounds
Things
fascinating.
going around the Earth.
So your whole career was really kind of advanced math and stuff like that.
It wasn't really a lot of advanced math. It was, there are very few careers that require advanced math. There wasn't real, it was intermediate math, I would say.
I'm getting the relativity of what advanced means. Uh,
Fair enough.
yeah. So, so a while back, you took retirement
Yes.
and you kind of took upon yourself this inquiry of what would life be like if I gave the same time and dedication to meditation as if I were on an ongoing meditation retreat. Is that right?
Yep, that's true.
And then you were drawn to what's called the elephant path, um, kind of deep, intensive practice. And I wonder, in your language, if you could tell us a little bit about like the origin of that path and the goal of that path.
Well, I mean, it's a path that it appeals very much to engineering minds because it has various stages, and in each stage of the path, there are like objective measures of whether you've so-called mastered the stage. And it starts out with pretty easy things, and then it progresses onto more and more difficult things. And it really, if you're looking to develop concentration, it's a very intense mechanism to do that. It was before I studied it, it was well, when I first started studying it, I had never encountered anything that was so intense. It was the most intense meditation that I ever did. And I had been meditating, for probably 15 years or so before I did
And,
it.
and
So
your practice before was more like of a Vipassana style, basically.
no, I did concentration. I just wasn't very good at
Wow.
it.
Okay. So what I find is when anyone starts off with a practice, there's the initial low-hanging fruit,
Hmm.
which are kind of like just the rushes, like the sense of, hey, I'm getting somewhere or insight. What were the early days of intensive concentration practice like for you? That really had you saying like, wow, I'm onto something.
Well, I guess the first time that I felt like I had was really onto something and didn't like the first thing that really gave me an inkling that there was something beyond what ordinary experience is when I was on a retreat and at some point during the retreat would close my eyes and I would see blinding white light. And it was the entire field of vision and it was blinding. It was like looking into the sun. And every time I sat down to meditate in the retreat, I had this blinding white light, and that was like not something that I could imagine making. It was just something that appeared, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is something." It also left me with some rather a different perspective on life, let's say. But
So
and I
how
go
does
ahead.
how does your part of the one of the things around the elephant path, as you kind of described, is like it's very much this, then this, then this.
Yep.
When this happens, and so you can kind of like measure, kind of quantify. To have an experience of closing your eyes and experiencing blinding white light, what does that do to your analytical mind?
Um, well, as I was trying to express that it just didn't up until that point. Everything was a sort of thinking and imagining process as opposed to what the actual experience was. And I would also say that that blinding white light experience was also motivational for me to do the elephant path later because I never reproduced that experience. And
Oh,
I chased that experience for many years
wow. Wow.
and never reproduced it.
That's so interesting.
Yep.
I think it's part of being on any path is experiencing at some point the lights and rainbows and then chasing lights and rainbows. I would say at least the first half of my spiritual career, if you will, was actively chasing lights and rainbows.
Yeah, it can be very seductive.
So as you're engaging into the elephant path and going through these stages, what were some of the early insights or the early experiences that really kind of, let's say, hooked you, drew you in, or got you leave it even more inspired?
Um, well, one of the better insights was that um, it's actually really great to not be special. Like up until that point in time, I had thought being special was a some sort of advantage or benefit, and it absolutely isn't. It's much nicer to be ordinary and not special.
Huh. So how did that, I'm curious, how did that come to you? Do you have a sense of,
Well, I think there are quote unquote little I insights and big I insights, and that was a big I. And it wasn't the insight occurs before the words appear. I mean, there's something that happens, and then there are words that follow it to describe it. And it just suddenly dawned on me. I was like, oh, oh, I've been running my life the wrong way.
yeah, that is so cool. And what's so interesting around concentration is, there's a sense of like, I'm doing this practice,
Yeah.
I'm focusing,
Yes.
I am um, overcoming the hindrances,
Right.
I am gathering my attention together. So it's this very much of reinforcing a sense of I, but then you
Yes.
stay with it, and then that experience of anatta, like where the small I just either gets fractured or falls away. That's such an amazing paradox.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that that happens because your default mode network, which is the part of the brain that keeps telling you who you are and what you prefer and what you don't like and what you want to have happen, that all calms down. And when you aren't constantly being told who you are anymore, then you don't really exist.
So this brings up a really interesting element of practice because in a sense you're strengthening the sense of self. You know,
Hmm.
you're strengthening concentration, you're developing a sense of stronger will, stronger resilience. You know, you're overcoming resistance, overcoming obstacles, all of that. So in a way, you're sort of like constructing a sense of who you are as a meditator. But
Yeah.
of course, as we know, this practice is actively a deconstruction process as well.
Yep.
So I wonder, when did you notice like the deconstruction process starting to kind of permeate your consciousness? Like what was starting to come undone?
Well, I would say that was it was alarming and abrupt. It was not as you say, I think I probably, when I was doing this intense practice, I developed this very, a strong concept of I, the meditator that's doing this and that. And at some point, I transitioned into sort of a euphoric state for about 5 months, and I thought that I had basically reached the end.
Wow.
And then I developed tinnitus, and my entire world unraveled. And I went from euphoria to the complete opposite. And part of that, I believe, or maybe a lot of it, was that my mental models, including that of myself, were perturbed, disturbed, undermined. And then there was like a panic that set in as a result of that.
Hmm.
Because, it's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the tinnitus? Was it just it was consistent or was it
Oh, it was horrifying. It wasn't consistent. I had auditory hallucinations. I had like rumbling in my ear, like the sound of breaking glass in my ear. And it was like distortions and sounds that I would hear. And I also had hyperacusis, which is uh, super increased volume of your hearing, basically. It was pretty awful.
wow. And so when you connect the dots to your practice and that experience, how do you think they're related?
Well, the practice that I was doing was hyper focused on sensory input, and basically, in the end stages of it, you end up flooding the mind with sensory experience so that you don't have any thought. And probably what happened is my interoception got turned up to like a very high volume. And what's interesting about that, can I digress for a minute?
Yeah, please.
So, just to make sense of what I'm about to say, so most of our experience in the world is not actually our sensory experience, it's a predictive model, it's a simulation. So, it's not really an excellent example of this, but if you hold your thumb out in front of you and you look at your thumbnail, that's how much of your vision is clear, that little tiny spot. And the rest of it is completely blurry, but you don't know it. Your brain just decides that everything's clear. And your brain just makes this whole scenery and then it error corrects. It checks with your sensory experience and just makes corrections. So if you, so what most of you experience is just your predictive models of the brain. And I'm going to back up a little bit here. It's actually the same thing as what happens when you're dreaming. When you're asleep and you're dreaming, you're constructing the whole world.
Mhm.
when you're awake, it's exactly the same process. You're just actually getting some error correction from your senses, which you're not doing when you're asleep. But it's almost the same thing. So, um, when when you're born, you don't have these models. You just have sensory experience, and you build them up over the course of your early life, and you create models that are very efficient. Like if your brain were to try to process all this sensory experience at once, you don't have enough processing power for it. So I think what happened to me is that I undermined these models, these predictive models, or you could think of it in some way that I kind of put myself into a permanent state of hallucinogenic sort of experience.
Mm.
And as a result, I got completely overwhelmed all the time by all the sensory experience, and it was absolutely horrifying. I couldn't deal with anything. I couldn't read. I literally could not function. And it took, I mean, that was about 3.5 years ago, and it took a good 3 years, I think, for my brain to reconstruct all that stuff so that I could function fairly normally.
Wow.
So
So
I think that's what happened.
yeah, so just to slow this down a little bit, because wow,
Sorry.
there's so much there. I actually for a long time I was really fascinated with like natural vision healing, and
Mm.
part of it is like training your eye to move because your eyes are actually they're moving around to be filling in that little space.
Saccades.
So along the way, again, I oftentimes I kind of use the analogy of like as you become more awake, like it's this you're just unpeeling the onion, you know. You start off the outer edge of the onion, and then as you progress, there are more and more memories, more and more of that conditioning, more and more of the tracks that we pick up. And and I know because you've done, I mean, in those 15 years previous to this, you had done a lot of work around unraveling um, early family system stuff and all that.
Not all of it, though.
So this is just part of it is like, so in the deconstruction of the conditioned self, um, just to back up a little bit, was there anything around, would you say anything around like early conditioning, early memories that you were encountering in the practice before the entire uh, framework?
Yeah, actually, I spent 4 months not doing any particular practice, but just sitting 4 hours a day. And in that period, not even really doing any sort of particular practice, like all my childhood memories and all that just kept coming up. And I, I thought I had reviewed my entire childhood, but I missed some parts of it that didn't come up until later.
Wow. Wow. Did it feel like it was happening organically? Did you feel okay with it? Did it feel like it was too much?
The early part, the first 4 months was no problem because it was really just more or less like therapy in my own mind. And it seems also true that when you experience sort of unpleasant memories when you're meditating, those memories get combined with sort of a pleasant, peaceful experience, and they become less charged as a result of that, is, my experience of that in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah, just to say, like in deep meditation, part of that call is the pleasure that's associated with it.
Yeah.
And there can sometimes be this sense of something like painful in the past, but there's almost like a pleasure and a joy in seeing it and feeling it lose its form, lose its grip.
Yeah, it's probably that you have a much more accepting sort of state when you're meditating and calm, then there's less resistance, and so it just kind of goes through easier than otherwise.
Yeah. So kind of getting back to where you had you had spoken to a little bit earlier. There's this story which you may know of this guy who he all he wants is to see God, is to look to know God. And he's looking, wanders the planet on this holy mission. And then suddenly one day he sees there's there's the house, and then like, there on the door is, this God, like this is it, and he rushes up and he's takes off his shoes and he's just about to knock and he realizes if I walk through that door, everything I know about myself is gone.
Yep.
And so as the story goes, he very, very quietly picks up his shoes, walks backward, starts running, and then spends the rest of his career teaching people how to find God. So you walked through the door and you felt,
I put my toe through the door.
well, no, but actually, so what about that? Because you felt your mental models just fall apart. There was, a deep sense of sustained disorientation
Oh yeah.
and fear. Was there a lot of
Oh my
fear?
God, yes. It was
So
horrifying.
can you kind of walk us through that? Like what what was it like? And then what started to lead to a shift?
Um, so I guess all of the things, the experiences that I had caused me to conclude that I had done something awful to my mind. And I mean, I may have strained it a bit, but mm, fundamentally, nothing went wrong. It's just that I didn't like the answer.
So the practice was actually working,
Yeah, right.
just that the results were less than satisfying.
The results were not as expected.
So I can only imagine if that was me, I would have been feeling a lot of despair
Oh, yeah,
and,
all the time. I
and
was in
hopelessness.
great despair.
Yeah. So were you able to work with the despair or was it just despair? Were you
It
aware you
was,
were feeling despair?
oh, yeah. It it was such a chaotic experience because I would go from despair to being aware of despair and then knowing that it wasn't my despair and then knowing that that meant that I didn't exist and round and round and round.
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
So the despair, it was just the despair.
Yeah, everything I looked at and everything I thought about fell apart and disappeared. It was there's absolutely nothing to hold on to.
Now, it's important to say that this was not like an afternoon.
No, it was the most horrible part of it was it was at least 6 months and it was bad after that, but not as bad.
Wow.
It was like 6 months of not being able to go to sleep and I lost I lost 20 pounds even though my wife was making me a cheesecake every other day that I ate. It was really bad.
Oh my gosh. So, in you know, in this path in Buddhism and Buddhist psychology, oh, hang on one sec. There's a little dog I need to retrieve.
Aw.
Someone's gonna go for a walk.
Aw, so cute.
So, so despite um flying too high to the sun and having the wax on your wings melt, something shifted. we're sitting here today, you're smiling. Um, you still remember your zip code. Uh,
Yeah.
from the depths, we speak of the refuges, in Buddhism, there's refuge in awareness, refuge in truth and refuge in love, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Where did you find refuge and what began to shift your experience?
Well, I had some help from various therapists, but the thing that really changed it for me is I met a Zen teacher that basically he convinced me that it was all okay, that there was absolutely nothing wrong, and that the experiences that I had, to walk back to the walking through the door. There's someone who said that fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. That is super true.
Wow. Wow. Fear of
So,
God is the beginning of wisdom.
Hmm?
Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I guess a lot of what was occurring during this period is I was overwhelmed by my own insignificance, and that would be an accurate perception. That's a you can't uh, you can't overestimate your own insignificance. It's truly
Yeah.
once things open up a little bit and you see how big things can be, yeah, you feel very small.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had an awakening of wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess
Seeing more clearly.
something like that.
Yeah, like seeing, it's like, we talk about, the definition of nirvana, as I understand it, is the blowing out, you know,
Hmm.
like this kind of extinguishing of desire and then this arriving in emptiness and all of that.
Yeah,
What,
everything looks empty.
yeah, so what about the heart?
Hmm. Um, so I guess what is left when the mind quiets down is I think you could just say it's love. It's like the mind when it gets quiet, the two things that seem to I would describe it as is a feeling of generosity and gratitude.
Hmm.
And I use those words because sometimes think of like happiness or whatever seems to be like combined with excitement or thrill or something like that. So it's not thrilling, it's gratitude and generosity is like how I describe it. It just comes out basically.
Wow. So when
So
you take it all away,
yeah,
kind of what's left?
yeah.
Wow. How did you experience it?
You mean what
In,
was the manner?
yeah, like in your practice, like,
It just happened one day when I was on retreat. Um, I prior to that, uh, I would say that I didn't have a sense of what I was, what we all are actually. It's not me specifically, but that experience, you see that, and it's like that's what's there when the other personal stuff disappears for a while.
mm,
And so to see that come out in sort of the absence of mm, the thinking, I guess, or the selfing or whatever you want to call it, is that really is really deep. It's like a very if without that experience, a lot of this meditation and anatta and all this stuff can become very it can seem like nihilism.
hmm.
But once you have that part, then it's much different. It is no longer a dry sort of analytical thing. Yeah, it's something else.
So Tracy, I'm curious, like in the recognition of generosity and gratitude, were there any teachings or practices that were resonant for you at that time?
I wasn't really doing any particular practice. It's just the feeling just emerged, and I mean, it was a retreat, so we were sitting, and but it was. I mean, there wasn't any particular practice, honestly. It's just that the mind had calmed down, and just all this just came out, and it didn't. It was. There wasn't. There was no volition to it. It was just. It just comes out.
Yeah.
It's completely non-volitional.
I kind of think like, you know, intense concentration practice is kind of this booster rocket, you know, and we're pushing through gravity, and it sounds like part of where your practice took you was like beyond gravity, where you became just more awake to presence, and more awake to emptiness, more awake to profound insignificance.
Yeah, I mean, there's expansion and contraction. It's not all expansion. But yeah, it's you know, we're getting into that part of the conversation where it's difficult to say things again.
Yeah,
You get to a point where you're discussing this and it's like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. But here's a question though. Like, when you reflect on the arc of your journey, um, from like the intensity to like the deconstruction, the breakdown, the kind of heart-centered, or awareness of gratitude and generosity and their nature, how would you describe what you've learned about the nature of transformation?
um, well, when I started all this and I had these goals and I wanted certain things and I didn't know what it was that I was asking for. And as my Zen teacher would say, what would he say about? I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. But you have to be careful what you ask for because it's well, so the end state of all of this is death. It's um it's death of what you think you are. So it's literal death. It's not death of the body, but it's dissolution of the self-identity. And so, oh, I know what my teacher was going to say. He said that stream entry has absolutely nothing to offer you personally.
Wow.
It it doesn't benefit a personal Tracy or Jonathan or anyone in any way.
So what does awakening mean to you now?
Uh, it's basically knowing what you are,
Hmm.
is what it is. And it comes and goes, and there's a misconception that we believe typically we go around thinking that we are either the body or the thoughts. And I think something that's helpful, I've often thought that I was the one thinking the thoughts, and something that I think is kind of helpful way of looking at that is the thinking mind is more or less like ChatGPT. It's just churning out the next most likely sentence,
Mm,
and there's no one inside of it that's thinking.
yeah.
There's no thinking. It's just I mean, there's thinking, but it's a mechanical process that spins out. It's not,
And that's part of like the predictive,
yeah,
just the predictive nature of the mind.
yeah. So we're
Like
not in it.
filling in the blanks and creating stories.
Yep. And they're not even about us. They're, it's just making up the stories.
Yeah. Having just sat a week-long retreat, I can attest to that. Yeah. So as you said, it sort of comes and goes.
Yeah.
But where are you now in your practice? Like what's alive for you as you continue to kind of integrate what you've been through?
Well, honestly, it wasn't until fairly recently, maybe maybe 3 months ago, that I felt comfortable meditating more than like an hour at a time because my my mind was so it was already in the state and it didn't need any more expansion.
Mm.
But I don't know. I guess I just so I will again refer back to my Zen teacher. He said that the ultimate expression of enlightenment is kindness. So, I just try to be kind. That's all there is to it. And I'm not particularly good at it because I really haven't had a lot of practice. I was a rather grumpy person for the first 50 years or so of my life. With good reason. I had good reason to be that way. So I'm not casting aspersions on my former self, but yeah, it's like I like the word kindness because it's some
Mm.
people use the word compassion, but that's kind of, a little bit more you know, esoteric, but it's the kindness thing is like really immediate and it's very practical and tangible.
Yes. Wow. So there's this sort of magic allure that some of us have around prolonged experiences of meditation and going on 3-month retreats and all that sort of thing. Um, what kind of caution and encouragement do you have for someone who would like to do like prolonged practice, but in particular, like the path that you followed?
Uh, so I guess first, whatever path that you're going to follow is the one you're going to follow. So there's no, there's no, anyway, the, I would, so after I had this sort of, expansion experience, we'll call it, all of the trauma that I'd missed came out, and that was also added to the unpleasantness of what was already going on. And at the time, I was retired and I didn't really have any responsibilities. And so my ability to recover from that was I had a lot of support for that. So I wouldn't recommend doing something like this unless you're prepared for the possibility of being out of commission for quite some time. My wife was also incredibly helpful because she kept telling me that I was going to get better, and I was convinced that I wasn't going to get better.
Mm.
So that was extremely helpful. It was very helpful to have people around that were supportive. And I didn't know that I would need that at the time, but it was sure fortunate that I did have that. And so if you're going to embark on some sort of intense practice, you might you might unfortunately get what you're looking for, and it might not be what you thought it was going to be. So,
So make sure you've got support.
yeah, especially what you need is you need a teacher who understands what can go wrong.
Mm.
That is super important. Like, it's all well and good because when things go wrong in this sort of thing, it's like they go way, way wrong. Like,
Yeah.
your mind can create a lot of it's the source of all unpleasantness. So it can create a lot of discomfort,
Mhm.
and a lot of dysfunction.
Yeah, so those are the cautions. Any encouragement for someone who's would really want to, maybe read Kuladas's book or, really wants to do a deep dive.
Well, it's worth it in the end. Um, you know, you get to see things in a way that you didn't see before, and it's quite yeah, it's quite expansive. It's uh it's mind-boggling actually. It's you know, awe-inspiring, and uh the the world is way more wondrous than you can ever imagine. But there might be some bumps along the road that could be yeah, could not be fun.
Mm. Tracy, what if you could now, when you think about when you first had that idea of like, wow, I have this space in my life. I'm going to follow this path and I'm going to really give myself to it. What advice would you have now for yourself when you were just starting out?
Um, so it's funny because if you had asked me this a year ago, I would have said, don't do this. But the intensity of what I did, you could say, it kind of forced things to happen that might not have otherwise happened. And looking back on it, I probably would have done the same thing, but it would have been nice to know perhaps what was in store for me and what I would need on the other side of it,
Mm.
because yeah, it was difficult to find resources that could you know, offer much insight into it, because not many people do that. So
It's not a big part of our Western culture, to be
no,
nurturing
and
that kind of inner work.
I mean, there might have been a gentler way to do it, possibly, but I think in some sense it was the intensity of it that just basically, you know, opened the dam, basically,
Hmm. Hmm.
and just wasn't prepared for what that meant.
Wow. Wow.
No one tells you that.
Well, it is that thing of like, do you really want to know? Do you really want to see?
Uh, so you could say something like, Tracy thought he wanted to see, but didn't really want to. But, that isn't what we are anyway. So there is I don't know, maybe that's too abstract or linear, but there's a part of your existence that doesn't want to know and will fight it a lot.
Yeah.
And then there's probably the larger part that you could say isn't really you. It's something larger that
Yeah.
is totally fine with it
Yeah.
and is totally fine with everything. So
There,
that aspect of it is, pretty nice.
in what I have seen, just in my own experience, my own glimpses, my own practice, and with other people, is that there's something deeply inside that is committed to survive no matter what.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's and it's
wired.
it's just wired. And as much as we can
Yeah.
judge ourselves for being fearful, or I certainly have, get
Yeah.
just really deeply lost in ruthless self-criticism around,
Right.
are you such a wuss? Like
Yeah.
that feeling of terror, of obliteration, that can come up sometimes. It's baked into these human bodies, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I have a lot more compassion for my own and others' sorry, psychological defense mechanisms because they're there. They're there for a reason.
Exactly. Exactly.
When they're
Exactly.
gone, you miss them.
Yes, exactly.
I certainly wouldn't, yeah, don't be hard on yourself about like fear or anxiety or because yeah, there's a lot to fear there.
Well, there truly is when the line between what we know and what we don't know begins to move.
Yeah,
Everything unprocessed, unseen, unfelt is there for to be seen in consciousness.
yeah,
And some of it's joyful, and wow, a lot of it is just it's a lot to digest.
yeah. I mean, a lot of it's in there because, you didn't want to experience it. So.
Yeah.
But that's also where kindness comes in, being kind for, having the fe kind about, the fears that, arise and kind about, the experiences that arise that a lot kindness and humility. Like humility, like, well, yeah, this is happening and, can't do anything about it. It's just happening. And who am I to think that I can, go against the will of God? So,
Mm. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Have you met others who are who have practiced similarly as you and
yeah.
gone through the kind of challenges you've gone through?
One of my best friends, he went through similar experiences, and but I think he had less of a challenge in some sense because he had a more pleasant and supportive childhood.
Hmm.
And so, when things get stripped away and you're kind of reduced to more primitive states, he had a more pleasant state to rely on than I did.
You had some resources, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And that's what I find is when we're really deconditioning, we're deconditioning all this pre-verbal,
Yeah.
you know, content that just lays down these tracks in our consciousness.
Yeah.
It is a wow, it's such a place to go.
It's
You know, I
pre-verbal. You're
you know,
right.
I spent a lot of time in the yogic tradition, and the guru's guru was a very interesting guy. Lots of advanced states and so forth, and he was in silence most of the time, but spoke in public every now and then. And when he would talk, he would keep his eyes moving because if his eyes would settle on one thing, he would just go into absorption. It was very
Yeah.
to
I
see.
had that experience.
Oh, I'm sure.
It
But
was
what
brutal.
Well, one thing he talked about though, and it's just an interesting, I mean, he said it was not but it's true, but it does seem that he said that when your practice takes you to such deep deconstruction, you will you can only go there with support,
Ah, yeah.
and just the fact that that you had a loving partner who was there to support you, what a beautiful gift.
Yeah, it was a very, very it was life-saving.
Amazing. Amazing. Wow. So what's life like now for you these days?
Pretty good. Um, you know, um, uh, they're the things that bother me a lot less than they used to, and you know, I can usually just sit for an hour with whatever's going on, and it's okay after that. So really, I guess the other thing is that you can you can you can go to a state where nothing is a problem. You can just because it's all of the problems are. are in the thinking mind. There's no problem that exists outside of the thinking mind. So if you can just not be in the thinking for a while, then everything's fine. It's a nice break.
Exactly. As my friend Anam Tubton says, no self, no problem.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you just have to not think, and it's not a problem. So,
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
but it's, yes, things are easier and more pleasant, and but they're not like euphoric, and there's not. It's not. It's You could say that we're all already awakened. It's just that we don't see it because the thinking mind is clouding it all up most of the time.
Mm,
So anyway, I mean, it's nice.
I love that. That's such a great way because the mind just wants to put so much gilded stuff around what it means
Yeah.
to be awake. And it's the whole kind of before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, after enlightenment. And that's it seems so authentic just the way you're describing it.
Well, so the thinking mind is the only place where a problem can occur. And there was some thought that I had after that. So you should probably cut this part out, but
I know this is perfect.
perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Well, Tracy, I'm so grateful. Thank you for your time and just articulating, what I think some of us imagine it's like to take time to fully dedicate to practice and to describe you know, the the challenges, the trials, the deconstruction, and then the reconstruction or whatever that is.
Well, I did want to add one more thing I just thought of,
Hmm.
that the thinking mind, it's basically like a politician. It creates problems and then pretends to solve them, and that's its entire function.
Yes. Yes.
That's all it does. And if it's not creating problems, then it doesn't exist.
That's so good.
Has no purpose.
Yes. Law Kelly has a great inquiry where he says, "Who am I if there's no problem to solve?"
Yeah,
And
right.
I know when I've shared it with people, I remember one person saying like, "Oh my God, my mind is all about creating problems, so
Yep,
I can be the one to solve them."
yep.
I mean, it's one thing to say it; it's another thing to like really get it.
Yeah, it's a fun experience.
Uh, wow. Well, thank you for being so generous with your time. Um, really grateful. Um, really grateful to hear a little of your journey.
Well, I hope this is helpful to someone, that they get something out of it. And of course, I always enjoy spending time talking to you.
Always fun. Always fun. If people did have questions from their experience, are you open to having some conversations?
Yeah, I've talked to people that, especially there have been a few people that have contacted me that had some pretty awful experiences, and it's kind of reassuring to have someone there that can say, yeah, you're not really. What would you say? There's a certain amount of comfort in someone who's been through stuff like that and that, came out the other side, and it was perfectly fine.
It's not only a certain amount of comfort, it's actually an incredible gift.
Mm.
That's the depth of spiritual friendship, you know.
Yeah, you're right. That's very true. Someone who can do that is that's super helpful for someone who's in that situation. That's an understatement of the century. It's super helpful to be around someone like that if you're in some sort of um, state that you're having trouble with.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a cliche story, but uh, the story goes that the Buddha's assistant, came up to him with this huge insight, and he said, "Isn't it true that half of the spiritual life is spiritual friendship?" And the Buddha allegedly said, "Don't say that. Spiritual friendship is
Yeah.
the whole of it."
Yeah, you're right. That's definitely true. You're right. That's absolutely correct. Because actually, all these words that are flying around back and forth, they're not really that important. It's actually the connection that's more important.
Yeah,
That's where the real stuff happens.
exactly. That's where kindness and presence and compassion,
Yep. Yep, yep,
and
yep.
as
That's very true.
one of my teachers said, that's the lubrication, you know, that keeps it going. So, well, I'm
Yep.
grateful for you and grateful for our friendship over these many years.
Me too. Very
Yeah.
happy about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take good care.
Take care.